It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Hello again, and welcome to Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. I'm Paul Tonino. He is Matt Sytek. So glad you could join us today for the next hour as we talk New York Giants football, a couple other things of the NFL if you prefer. And also our prospect previews today will be on the TCU Horned Frogs. They've got a handful of guys, actually, who are going to draw interest in this year's NFL draft. And so we'll be getting to that phone call in just a minute as soon as Pearson gives me the heads up. And we'll take your calls at 201-939-4513. And as always, remember, you can get this program live from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. weekdays here on Giants.com or your app, or the archive of the show is always on Giants.com/podcasts, your favorite podcast platforms everywhere. And you can also go to the Giants YouTube page. Well, with that, Matt, we wish you a good morning. And you know, once again, we are headstrong into our NFL prospect previews, and we've learned a lot. We tell people all the time, we go right to the sources. We go to guys who have been around these players all the time, and we're going to get to TCU in just a second.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about some of these prospects. The group kind of headlined, I would say, by one guy in particular.
Yeah, I think so.
Josh Newton.
I think so.
But they have a couple of other guys that, you know, could be day 3 picks at some point. You know, I wouldn't say any of them or all of them are guaranteed to get selected, but they're definitely on the day 3 radar. Some intriguing prospects, and yeah, I'm excited to learn more about them.
All right, so let's head over to find out more about TCU, and Jamie Plunkett of the Horned Frog Blitz joining us here today on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Jamie, thanks for taking the time, and hope everything's well with you.
Hey, guys, I appreciate you having me on the show today. Excited to chat about the Horned Frogs a little bit.
Well, let's get right to it, because Matt's already dropped one of the names, Josh Newton, the cornerback, who, by the way, is at a position that's very deep in this year's NFL draft. I think, in all honesty, there are at least 3 rounds of quality prospects at corner coming up in just a few weeks. How high do you think Newton can go? What do you like about his game, and what's he going to have to improve on?
You know, I think if we were having this conversation a year ago, I'd say he was probably somewhere in a second-round draft pick spot. But because of the depth of the class, like you mentioned, and because his performance maybe took a little bit of a step back in 2023 from the title run in 2022, I could see him maybe 3rd round, even falling into the 4th round. I think the thing that we need to know about Josh Newton is, how does he do at the NFL level covering guys in man down the sideline? Mm-hmm. In 2023, he got beat a couple times. You can go back and look at the Texas game specifically. There were moments against Colorado where guys playing him towards the sideline were able to get past him a little bit. And the question will be, was that a deficiency in his game, or was that because of what kind of the philosophy of TCU's defense has been the past few years, which is really leaving guys on an island, expecting them to cover for 5 to 7 seconds, which I don't think is necessarily sustainable for most cornerbacks. But with Josh, I think what we're going to see at the next level is, can he handle man-to-man for those outside, bigger wide receivers? Because I think, frankly, he projects really, really well as a nickel corner.
Mm-hmm.
He's got no fear going over the middle, very good covering, those first 15 to 20 yards. And it truly is a playmaker and a great tackler over the middle third of the field as well. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up going, and the system that he goes into too will go a long way to showing what kind of success he can have at the NFL level.
Yeah, you touched on what I was actually going to ask you first. So Newton, he had a great 2022 campaign, 3 interceptions, 12 passes defensed, and as you mentioned, seemed to take a bit of a step back this past season. As someone that's covering every single game there, what exactly happened there? Like, why do you think his ability in press man coverage took that little bit of a step back?
I think it helps when, like in 2022, you have a guy like Trey Tomlinson playing the other corner spot. And so there's not as much opportunity maybe to be covering the number one guy on opposing offenses. It's funny because in 2022, obviously Trey Tomlinson is the guy that came away with the Thorpe Award for the nation's best defensive back, but I think the consensus among the TCU fan base that year was that Josh Newton was the best corner on the team. And in 2023, he had the opportunity to kind of step up and prove it. But like I mentioned, the philosophy of TCU's defense in 2023 was very reliant on coverage lasting 5, 6, 7 seconds because they weren't generating a ton of pressure. They were doing a lot of three-man front stuff on the defensive line that gave opposing offenses plenty of time to get through their reads, plenty of time for receivers to get open. And so if you go back and watch a lot of Newton's film, he's covering really, really well for the first 3 or 4 seconds. And then as the play breaks down, as quarterbacks move out of the pocket, that's where he tends to lose his man a little bit. And so I think if he goes into a system that has a good front seven, has a really strong pass rush, you're going to see a cornerback who's a lot more productive than maybe he was on film in 2023.
One more question about him. I only saw cut-ups from this past season, so I'm going to take your word for it that he was much better the year before. But during his time at TCU, how much time did he spend in the slot compared to being out on the boundary?
Not a tremendous amount. There were definitely moments in 2023 where, as they were kind of searching for solutions in the secondary, he moved around quite a bit. But realistically, in the 3-3-5 that TCU ran for the past 2 seasons, most of the time it was a safety that was kind of dropping down into the box to cover that slot.
Yeah, I just have one more on Newton. So I know you mentioned before you could see him, potentially lining up at the nickel corner spot in the NFL. Is that where you think he, projects best in the NFL? Do you think he could, solidify himself as a starting outside cornerback?
I think he's definitely got the ceiling of being an outside corner. But I think if you're trying to ease a guy into the league and you want a guy to be able to have success right away, maybe giving him the opportunity to be the nickel corner early in his career as he continues to develop would be a nice little plan to get him in and get him some reps early and then see if he can reach that potential that he's got to be that outside corner.
All right, we know another position that's pretty strong in this year's draft is offensive line, and Brandon Coleman is the other higher-profile TCU player that'll be picked up in a couple of weeks. Left tackle, left guard, got some flexibility there. Your take on him, one of the things that I was a little disappointed in when he came in at 6'4" and 313 at the Combine, I would suspect if he's going to move inside the guard in the NFL, he's going to have to put a little more beef and strength on, no?
You're probably right, and I'll be honest with you, I was a little surprised by those numbers as well, having stood next to him multiple times. And I'm 6'3", and it feels like he's got multiple inches on me. So I was a little shocked by those numbers. But the reality is that he does have position flexibility. He can throw a couple more pounds on probably and get away with it, not lose too much lateral movement. But I think he's at his best when he is at left tackle. He's got a great reach, good footwork. He can play really both tackle positions if you ask him to. And I think the challenge with Brandon is communicating with that guard. I think in 2022, if you look at a lot of these prospects in this year's draft for TCU, and they kind of mirror TCU's last 2 seasons, really great 2022s, maybe a little bit of regression in 2023. And Brandon Coleman had the benefit in 2022 of playing next to probably the best left guard in college football in Steve Avila, who's now with the Rams, right? And he started every game for the Rams this year. He didn't have that benefit in 2023. You saw him move from tackle to guard before the season started and then move back to tackle halfway through the season as the Frogs offensive line had some injury issues. And there was a little bit more inconsistency. I'm not sure if that was the position movement or if that was because there was some more inexperience next to him along the offensive line. One-on-one, he's a great pass blocker, great run blocker, but I wonder if the continuity there is probably the reason for the setback this year.
So I've been doing some research on Coleman. It seems like he has, great athleticism. He had one of the highest athleticism scores of all the guards at the Combine this in March, according to Next Gen Stats. He, according to Pro Football Focus, did not allow a sack on over 400 pass block snaps last season, spending time at tackle and guard on the left side. Seems like, all these factors that he should be more of a, solidified draft pick, and instead, he's being projected as a possible day 3 pick, maybe even not get drafted. So what exactly do you think he needs to do, not before the draft, but over the next few months leading up to his first rookie season to sort of solidify himself as an NFL lineman?
That's a great question, and I wonder if some of his inconsistencies in the run blocking game are what's holding him back. I mean, you mentioned his PFF grades. If you go and look at the breakdown between pass block and run block, his pass blocking grades are consistently about 20 points higher than his run blocking, and that's where TCU struggled as a whole last year, was opening up holes along the line for some of their running backs, and they were pretty pass dependent last season, especially in the back half of the year. So I think with him, what he needs to do over the next few months is find a way to convey the fact that he is improving as a pass blocker and can improve as a pass blocker, and use some of that athleticism to maybe show that he can pull a little bit more, get up to the second level, whatever is required of him. I think that's probably a way he can improve his draft stock. But realistically, I think that's something that you show once you're in minicamp versus at this point before the draft.
I'm going to go quick here before we go to another position and ask you about the right tackle, Andrew Coker, because it seems to me the measurables at 6'7", 34-inch arms, 315. He's got room to add some more strength and power and beef onto that frame, but the tape doesn't really get you too excited. How much is that because maybe he just didn't develop properly? I mean, is there more upside there? Is he a developmental guy who somebody might take a flyer on late?
I think I could see someone taking a flyer on him late. I think the reality for Coker is that he's pretty developed at this point. I mean, he was a senior this year. He played both tackle spots throughout his TCU career, never really solidified as much as I think folks wanted him to. And part of the challenge, too, I think, with his career is the offensive line coaching change. Mm-hmm. TCU underwent a staff change in 2022. He had been in a different system for a long time, and this new system that came in, I think he had 3 offensive coordinators in the 4 years he was here. So that's done some growth at times, and I think he maybe was a little bit of a victim of that. There were some inconsistencies, especially in the pass blocking that we saw that should not have happened as a fifth-year senior. Mm-hmm. And I think when you look at the film and see some of those inconsistencies, that's probably what's holding him back at this point. I don't know if his size precludes him from sliding in and being a guard at the next level. I don't know that that's maybe an option for him, but I could see someone taking a flyer on him. And if that team has a strong offensive line coach, there's still maybe another level of play for him that's yet to be uncovered.
Sticking with the offense, but switching positions, I want to talk about tight end Jared Wiley. This past season, 47 receptions, 520 yards, 8 touchdowns. Those numbers were all more than his first 4 collegiate seasons combined. So do you think Wiley is still growing as a pass catcher? Do you think this past season's production in the passing game is that kind of his ceiling as a pass catcher option in a NFL offense?
Oh, I think there's definitely a high ceiling for Jared Wiley. He's one of the TCU guys I'm highest on in this draft class, simply because we saw, I think, a glimpse of his potential this season. That being said, TCU's offense this year, first year under offensive coordinator Kendall Briles, really does favor the tight end quite a bit. We saw the fruit of that this year with Jared Wiley, but I do think that he's got the translatable skill set to be successful in the league. I mean, the guy's 6'7", 250. He's got an incredibly large wingspan. He's fast. He runs great routes. Don't ask him to run block. Maybe.
No, not at all.
But I mean, when you're talking about a guy in the passing game who can split out into that slot as well and be a weapon along the line in a couple different ways, I'm really high on Jared Wiley. I see the draft projections, and I'm a little confused. I would like to see him maybe go in the late 3rd, early 4th round. And I think whoever gets him is going to get a real prize in this year's draft.
All right, there's one other fellow on offense, Amani Bailey, a little bit of a fire plug. They listed him at only 5'7" in terms of the NFL measurement at 202. And, I'll tell you, a guy like that's got to have a lot of heart if he's going to succeed. I was a little disappointed to see him run 4.61 is what he was clocked at. I think he's probably going to need to be a little bit faster than that if he's going to make an impact in this league.
He plays faster than that. I was surprised by that number as well because it felt really low. To me, game speed, he plays faster than a 4.6. He runs, I think, a little bit closer to what Kendre Miller was running a year ago when he came out. And I can't remember what his combine number was, but watching those two guys go back-to-back in practice over the last few years before Miller was drafted, they had similar game speed. And so I could see him being another guy who goes late and is a nice kind of surprise for whoever picks him up, similar to what Amari DiMercato has been for the Arizona Cardinals this past season. You know, he was a guy that was undrafted out of TCU, was the backup to Kendre Miller for the last several years, and really, you know, what he did in the second half of the Fiesta Bowl against Michigan, I think kind of put him on NFL radars. What Amani Bailey has the capability to do, I think, is similar to Amari DiMercato in that sense. And again, I don't know if he ends up getting drafted or if he's an undrafted kind of guy, but I think he's got the ability to make an NFL roster for sure.
Yeah, so just one last question for me, moving over to the defensive side of the ball. I want to ask about safety Mark Perry. So I saw that he, you know, kind of lined up all over the place for the TCU defense over the last 2 seasons. He saw a significant time, you know, at both safety spots in the slot. How does Perry use his, you know, combination of size, athleticism, even his versatility? How does he use that to his advantage on the field?
He's a big physical guy, you're right. And I think some of his numbers that he showed at the Shrine game that he was at and then the Big 12 Pro Day, where I think he ran the second fastest 40 at the Big 12 Pro Day this year, he's a great run stopper. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He'll stick his nose in and he'll get in there and get dirty on the line. He's one of those safeties that TCU really likes to kind of bring up and have as kind of that quasi-third linebacker. Coverage-wise, I think he gets beat on double moves at times, but he's still got some pretty good coverage grades from throughout his time at TCU. And I think the biggest thing for him was the step he took forward after he transferred from Colorado to TCU, showed his coachability, showed his ability to develop and improve. And he's another one of those late-round guys, like you mentioned, who I think if an NFL team takes a chance on him, he's one of the hardest workers I've ever encountered at TCU and is willing to kind of show what he's worth.
Well, there's no doubt that special teams does hold a lot of tickets for those kinds of guys, fringe guys, to make it, especially with the way they're changing now the kickoff return rule. We're expecting there to be a lot more plays for those kinds of guys to maybe squeeze onto a roster. And then obviously with the expanded practice squads of the last few years, that's always a potential ticket as well. Jamie Plunkett of the Horned Frog Blitz, where can fans read more about these prospects if they'd like to, if they want to check in more on your work?
Yeah, absolutely. HornedFrogBlitz.com is where all my stuff lives. We're part of the 24/7 Sports Network, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Frog Preacher. That's where I post a lot of free content as well. Jamie,
thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, fellas.
Be well. So TCU with a handful of guys who may be of some interest as we wrap up this month with the NFL draft out in Detroit. You know, it's funny. So many times when you look at the tape of some of these guys and you don't know the inner workings. For example, when he was talking about the offensive line and the fact that there were so many coaches who had been involved in their offense. And that's the thing. You know, you watch some of the tape and you say, well, like a Coker, and you say, the tape, there's got to be something more there. You know, the measurables are enticing, but there's not enough on tape. Why? Well, this is why we have these guys on the program who have been there every step of the way, because, you know, somebody just reading, picking up an internet or a piece of paper may not understand the inner workings of why this guy maybe not as developed as maybe he should have been.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you know, you and I up here, we do our research before talking to these guests, but we're not, as you said, we're not there every day. We're not watching these guys in practice. We're not seeing every single game. So it's great to, you know, hear from guys like Jamie, who, as you said, can give us insight into how certain players were, guys that aren't necessarily in, you know, the national spotlight, how they performed throughout the entire season, how they potentially grew, where, you know, where parts of their game might have fallen off from the first game of the season towards the end of the season. So it's really great, having these guests on and getting some just great insight into a lot of these guys.
And many times we'll talk to one of these guests and they'll tell us that the guy was more nicked up or banged up than maybe they were talking about during the season, and they're willing to tell us, well, so-and-so had this and had that, and that may be one of the reasons why his play declined. Well, guess what? You're not going to necessarily see that in all the draft preview stuff that you read online or again, in a magazine. So there's so much value in having these guys, and that's why we appreciate you for listening, because we're trying to bring the best information possible, and we appreciate all of our guests in our network around the NFL who are so good to us, really around the NCAA, who are so good to us in previewing these NFL prospects. Remember, the Giants Huddle is a long-form podcast, has all kinds of interviews with NFL dignitaries, former players, coaches, et cetera, et cetera. You could always go to your favorite podcast platform, go to the Giants Huddle, subscribe, and giants.com/podcasts, and leave a positive 5-star review on Apple, as John always likes to say, because it helps the ratings, keeps the program alive. Giants season memberships. Okay, remember now, 2024 is already turned the calendar, and the season will be here before you know it. So you can get your season ticket memberships to Giants football, not just on game day, but memberships are now available. To learn all about exclusive member benefits, visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And Giants TV is the official online TV streaming app, bringing original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. Well, folks, for the rest of this program, it's us and it is you at 201-939-4513. Before we get to our phone calls, and our bank is open, so if you'd like to get in, please dial us up. I do want to touch base on a couple of quick Giants signings, Matt, that happened late last week. And I know there may have been a couple of moments that on Friday's show they were able to touch on it, but I think it's important just to review it again because a lot of things get lost over the weekend.
Yep.
And the Giants made 2 signings. I'm going to start with the more important signing because linebacker / safety / Mr. Versatility Isaiah Simmons is back in Big Blue. I love it because, personally speaking, he's been one of my favorite players since he came out of Clemson. A guy who is excellent at coverage and excellent at blitzing. My concern about him coming back was that those are 2 very desirable traits, especially in today's NFL, where teams love to use sub-packages. I thought for sure another team out there would give him a big paycheck and woo him away because those, again, are 2 very cool traits to have. Well, Shane Bowen, the Giants' new defensive coordinator, one of the fewest amount of blitzes in terms of percentage in the NFL last year. Doesn't like to send a lot of heat. So that said to me, logically, Simmons, if he stays here, he's basically just a coverage linebacker. Well, that doesn't seem to be the best way to use his tools, and I don't see the Giants being able to outbid somebody if they're going to, put up some money for his services. As it turns out, he's coming back. I'm thrilled because I really, really dig the guy's tools. Now, that says to me one of a couple of things. Either A, Bowen does have plans for him to also be part-time blitzer because, again, Wink Martindale was one of the most blitz-happy guys you're ever going to want to meet, and that's what Simmons loved to do. And toward the last month of the season, he was even more productive and more impactful than he had been earlier in the year because they were sending him more. So either Bowen's going to send more blitzes than what he did in Tennessee, which is possible, or somehow, some way, the market out there wasn't as high as I thought it was going to be, and Simmons talked to Bowen and decided, you know what? Maybe I'll just stay here and see if I can develop under this new defensive coordinator. Either way, I think it's a really good move for the Giants.
Yeah, me too. I mean, if you follow what, a lot of different reporters were saying since the end of the season, or at least since the Giants made the change at defensive coordinator, not a lot of people thought that Isaiah Simmons would be back. A lot of people thought he was brought in last year because of his fit in Wink Martindale's defensive system, And people questioned whether or not, as you said, whether or not Bowen would have a good role for him. But clearly, both Simmons and the coaching staff felt that they have a role for him to play in this defense. At what position? Who knows? I mean, he played kind of all over the field last year. As you mentioned, though, he was great in coverage last year. Great. He had over 200 coverage snaps. And, while PFF grades, take it with a grain of salt, he had an 82.7 coverage grade from PFF last year. That's great numbers. Great. And as we know, Xavier McKinney signed with the Green Bay Packers already. Safety is a position where, the Giants do have Jason Pinnock and Dane Belton, but a lot of people were thinking that they could still afford to add another safety, maybe even two safeties. Maybe Simmons was brought in to play more of the safety position instead of what he was doing last year. I mean, I would love to see a safety rotation of Simmons, Dane Belton, and Jason Pinnock. I think all three are still young players that are on the rise, that are still growing and developing as NFL players. But yeah, I'm very excited about Simmons being back. He brings at least, more depth to the safety position. He brings so much versatility. He's probably the most versatile defender that the Giants now have on the defense. So I'm excited to see what he can do in Shane Bowen's defense this year.
That I would agree with. I like him as a sub linebacker. I think the role that he had last year, and as the season went on and he continued to improve and get better at it, that's to me what he is best used as, a part-time blitzer and a part-time cover guy. But hey, whatever Shane Bowen's got in mind for him, they were able to come to terms on something that made sense. And Joe Schoen put out the pen, put out the paper, and said, hey, let's do this again. And they're going to do it again. And so I'm really, really glad about that. I think it's interesting, though, that Bowen loves to run a four-man front. And with that four-man front, you would probably believe that you're looking at Burns and Tibbs on the ends, and you're looking at Dexter Lawrence in the middle, and probably Nochez or Nacho, I should say, Nacho or Riley or Davidson, as it stands right now. Okay, we don't know if the Giants are going to add another defensive tackle, but that's probably your four-man front. Now, if you're going with that as your base defense, you're not putting Simmons on the field in all likelihood. Okay, he's more of a sub player, because when he's on the field, he's either going to be in coverage or blitzing. You put him on the field in a 4-3 kind of set, doesn't really suit his skills very well. So, again, I wonder if Bowen is going to be tweaking his formula and his scheme and his philosophy off of what he did in Tennessee, which is entirely possible. Leopards do sometimes change their spots in the National Football League. Okay? So that's going to be very interesting to keep tabs on during training camp in particular. Going to have to watch exactly what they're doing with Isaiah Simmons. All right, now.
Real quick, though, I just want to say, I do think it's important just to remember Simmons was acquired in a trade at the very end of training camp last year. He was kind of thrown right into the mix.
No doubt.
Now he will have an entire offseason to get a full, strong comprehension and understanding of the defense, of the new defense, and I think he'll be able to sort of grow more into a role as opposed to last year where, not that they didn't want to throw too much on his plate right away, but when you acquire a guy right before the start of the season,
tough.
It's tough compared to guys that have been there for months and learning the defense for months. So just want to note that, having a full offseason to learn the defense, to talk with the coaches, with his teammates, to train with his teammates, I think that will benefit Isaiah Simmons in a big way this year.
Just remember this, when he was with the Cardinals, he had said to them he didn't want to play a lot of safety, and they tried to do that to him, and that didn't sit so well. He wants to be more of a blitzer. So we got to keep all that in mind. Look, he signed on the dotted line, so he must be okay with what they told him.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so personally, I'm very happy to see Isaiah Simmons back. Now, another late signing at the end of last week was running back Dante Miller, former Columbia star who wound up going to South Carolina. thought he was going to get an extra year of eligibility because he had played so few snaps in one of his seasons, figured he was going to get a red shirt. Did not get it. The NCAA wound up delaying forever a ruling on him. He did not get that year in time, wound up sitting out last season, and basically now was left without a home. Could not play in the NCAA and could not go into the NFL draft. So what happens? Well, he is at South Carolina's Pro Day a few weeks ago and runs a 4.27 in the 20. In the 20, the 40. It seems like the 20, right, if you're that fast? The Giants decide, you know what? Let's bring you on up, give you a workout, and see what we can do about it. And, they signed him. This is a guy who has tremendous speed and quicks. He's short, stocky, cut out of granite. Real fire plug kind of player. I think in the new kickoff rules, he will be a terrific guy to throw back there on kickoffs at the very least. And I know the Giants are really, really happy to get this guy flying under the radar.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I mean, as you touched on his 40 speed, a 4.27, which again, when you're at these collegiate pro days, it's not quite the same as like in official NFL combine time. So
it's not in stone.
Yeah, so 4.27 I think was the best time he got. It varied a little bit, but regardless, in addition to that, he bench pressed 28 reps of 225 pounds. So between his 4.27 40 and the 28 reps on the bench press, both of those, if he had been at the combine, would have been the top marks for any running back in this year's draft.
He's a specimen.
He is a physical specimen. And as you mentioned, I was thinking the same thing. At the very, very least, he should provide the Giants with a very exciting option or potential option to use with these new kickoff rules. I mean, putting him back there as a kick returner, opposing special teams units are going to have a lot of trouble finding him on the field, keeping up with his speed, and bringing him down.
I agree.
So this, undrafted free agent, again, a weird, unique story, I should say, of how he ended up landing to the Giants. But this could end up being a, very intriguing signing, a low-key intriguing signing. I mean, a guy nicknamed Turbo. You have backfield now. You have Turbo. You have Motor. It's a pretty interesting backfield the Giants are putting together.
What's funny about it is that because of the NCAA glitch, in reality, he would have been available for the supplemental draft last year. And they just delayed in getting all his paperwork squared away before they finally decided he was ineligible. And so they really put this guy in a bad spot. But he was so eager and so hungry to continue playing football that he busted his butt and said, I'm not quitting. I'm going to keep working out. And again, South Carolina brought him to their pro day, and that's where he caught the eye of a lot of scouts, and the Giants moved quickly on him. So with the new kickoff rules, again, folks, I don't know if you were on one of the shows that we talked about with those new rules, but there's anticipation that running backs will be the best fit for the new returners with the newfangled rules. And so because vision's going to be critical, okay, vision, hitting the hole, and some power. And obviously speed because of the way that the players are now going to be packed together and they're not going to get the whole head start and everything else. All these skills, they're assuming that running backs may be the best kickoff returners under the new conditions. So anyway, that's why we kind of see him where he is. 201-939-4513 is our phone number. Cliff is on line 1, and you're first on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Hello.
Hey, guys. Good to be with you. I had a couple of questions about the offensive line and Drew Lock, both the signings and of both of those. Paul, you had this, you were saying last week about getting the offensive line functional, and I was wondering, you also had this thing from Parcells about hold the fort. Is functional a step above hold the fort?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Hold the fort is kind of like barely functional. That's kind of like a guy who you're just plugging in because he's a live body. He's got 2 arms, 2 legs, a heartbeat, and he can breathe. Okay? You can just hold the fort. He's not a disaster. That doesn't mean he's functional. It just means he's not a disaster. And I'm not going to embarrass any players who have been here in the last 20 years and start naming disasters. That's not what I'm about. But yes, hold the fort guys are not functional. Functional guys are a notch above that. And I think it's important to remember, by the way, too, when I don't know if you listened to the end part of the program when I tried to explain functional in a way, and I know you weren't here, Matt, for the show, but I want to make sure we got this clear for everybody. Functional is like a pass or fail grade in a college course, okay? It's either you're functional or you're not. And I guess it was Hugo was on the line. Was it Hugo Pearson who was on the line and asked me about it? And he goes, well, but don't you want to be better than functional? Well, sure you do. But it's a pass-fail grade. You're either functional or you're not. It's a pass-fail grade. It's not about A, B, or C. You either pass or you don't. And then after that, if you are functional, everybody from the best line in the league to the line that's just functional, they're all in that bin. If you want to raise to the higher level of the bin, as I said, when you want to pass the ball and everybody in the building knows it, you can pass protect for any play in your playbook. If you want to run the ball and everybody in the building and everybody watching on TV knows it, and you can still win the line of scrimmage and get positive yardage. Those are the things that separate the best offensive lines from the ones who are just at the bottom of the functional pool. But again, functional is a pass or fail grade. Let me make that very clear.
Yeah, I remember that. That was great last week. I got a couple of questions about that. Well, first of all, Dan Salamone had this terrific article posted who was actually starting on the offensive line for every game last year. And we finished 4-3 the last 7 games. I noticed we had the same 5 guys except for a couple of guys on the right side in the last game. And we had heard from Jonathan that sometimes you only need 3 games for guys to play together for them to click. So on the one hand, they have to play together, and it seems like the main asset that they went for with these signings is these guys have been durable at the NFL level. We have drafted guys who never missed a college game and were banged up all the time in the NFL. And that seems to be a thing. But the question is, I had asked you guys in the past about, I thought you had said somewhere 3 to 5 years for an offensive lineman, and you ended up saying, no, it's 3 years for anybody coming into the league in any position. But I think maybe the thing about the OL was, is it possible it took 5 years to find out how good somebody could actually be playing in the offensive line, what his ceiling was going to be?
Well, the rule of thumb, Cliff, is by your 3rd season in the league, you need to show really kind of what you are. And if you haven't really busted out by the 3rd year, then chances are you're not going to. There are late bloomers. There are exceptions to the rule. But that's usually the MO of teams. You better show us what your ceiling is, or at least part of that, by your 3rd season. There's not any more mulligans after that. Offensive line-wise, you can't go by the old rule back in the 80s when Parcells was here. The rule was you wanted your offensive linemen, or at least the bulk of your offensive line, to stay together for at least 2 years to become truly cohesive. That rule is now in the garbage because free agency and the salary cap destroyed any hope teams really have of keeping 5 guys together for 2 years. By the time, if you're lucky enough to do that, certainly by the 3rd year, guys are running away to get a bigger paycheck. So, unfortunately, that part is gone. That part of knitting the fabric is gone. Now it's like you better get your act together, and hopefully your 5 guys can have some chemistry after like 3 games. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Thank you, salary cap. Thank you, free agency. Appreciate what you've done to the league.
Yeah. About Drew Lock quickly. When I was still processing the Brian Burns signing, it was such a huge move, and I was still processing it. And then the Drew Lock news came in, and that made me delighted for some reason because it seemed like it took all the steam out of the craziness in the quarterback conversation, because here we had a guy that I thought was really pretty damn good as an alternative to anybody that you could possibly draft that you would expect anything from unless they were already here for a year or two at least. And here was a guy who could step right in and who knew what his ceiling was when he had a tough. And then we had this guy on last week who was an expert. I'm not his peer, who didn't think much of Drew Lock, one of your guests. But I was thinking maybe that was because he was trying to sell Michael Penix. So I'm thinking that Drew could really be a very good player. I just think I did wonder why he only got $5 million, but do you really think we've seen what he can do based on where he's been and with the lousy situations?
Yeah, I mean, look, he hasn't started much since the 2020 season. The 2020 season, he started 13 games. Since then, over the last 3 seasons, he started a total of 5 games. So he hasn't gotten a whole bit much of a chance, honestly. But last year, when he did fill in for 2 weeks for Geno Smith, starting for the Seattle Seahawks, he put together back-to-back very solid games. First, going up against a very talented San Francisco 49ers defense, threw for almost 270 yards, 2 touchdowns, did have 2 interceptions, but completed over 70% of his passes. The following week, which is the game that, at least us Giants fans probably remember pretty well, was when he led the Seahawks to a comeback Monday night victory over the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, completed 2/3 of his passes, over 200 yards, a touchdown. He looked very good and especially on that last drive in the Eagles game, he had full control of the offense. He looked calm. He looked composed. And he led the unit right down the field and threw the game-winning touchdown with under 30 seconds left. Is there more to his game that might still be untapped? I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, the Giants brought him in very clearly to be the backup quarterback. Joe Schoen made it abundantly clear that that is the case. But as we've seen, especially last season, the backup quarterback position is a very valuable and important position. Injuries happen. They happen to the guy, that's touching the ball on every single play a good amount. And it is good to have a guy that can come in if your starter does get hurt and that you just have full confidence that he's going to be able to lead your offense and do it well. He's going to be composed. He's not going to, have any sort of mental freakouts or anything like that. That's what you want in a backup quarterback, and that's exactly what the Giants have in Drew Lock.
Cliff, thanks for calling.
Bet.
Stay well. 201-939-4513. Just to get you caught up, Matt, it was a Softy Mailer who's at KJR Radio in Seattle, long-time Seattle sports personality and host out there, real avid follower of the Washington Huskies and the Seattle Seahawks. He came on, and we talked about the Huskies prospects, and then I asked him a question about Locke, and he basically just dumped on him. He was not a fan. Now, I had talked to a scout when the Giants signed Locke. I asked a scout, I said, did you happen to catch his game against Philadelphia? He said, oh, yeah, and he looked good.
He did.
And I know what the numbers say. The numbers say he was good.
Yep.
But he goes, I see something there. He goes, I think if they need him to play, I think he can play, especially with Dable, getting his hands on him. Well, Softy wasn't buying that. Softy said that until the fourth quarter, Locke looked terrible that day. It's quite clear he is not a Drew Lock guy. So, Cliff, he was not, quote, an expert, but somebody who certainly has been around football a long time, and I trust his opinion. His opinion was not very high, but we're not talking about a scout now. We're talking about a fellow media guy who covers the teams well and knows the teams well. He clearly had a bias against Locke. There's no doubt about that because the Seahawks said that they wanted him back.
Yeah.
So I don't think they were listening to Softy too much because they said they wanted him and they wanted to keep him. So I don't want to poo-poo what he said, but I think you have to remember the context and the lens you're looking at. He was not as impressed by Locke as the Seahawks were, nor as much as the Giants obviously were.
And look, everyone is entitled to their own opinion.
No question.
Of course. No question. But Joe Schoen would not have brought Drew Lock in unless he was confident that he would be able to lead the offense if called upon.
Correct.
I have no doubt in my mind about that. So, look,
exactly.
Again, as we've said, he's brought in to be the backup. Ideal scenario, he wouldn't have to see the field this upcoming season because that means whoever's starting at quarterback is healthy the entire year, and we'd obviously sign up for that. But if called upon, I'm confident that Locke can lead the offense, especially as you mentioned, especially with Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, Shea Tierney, the offensive coaching staff that the Giants have now built. I have no doubt in my mind that Locke would be able to run the offense well.
Yeah, give some credit to those guys, because this is a heck of an offensive staff that knows how to bring out the best in quarterbacks, and you got to put some faith in them to be able to draw out some really good things. We go to line 2, Mike in Massachusetts. You're next on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Hello.
Good afternoon, fellas. I'm going to need your help with this question to make it sound correct, but I want to talk to you about cognitive tests. There's been a lot in the press recently about the test that Purdy and I think Stroud took, which they're saying is the S2 test, and then the Wonderlic or test that apparently Stroud failed. And then recently there's an article that supposedly LSU uses or used to develop Jaden Daniels. They apparently worked with a German company that developed a program that puts all of the possible opponents' defenses into a program, and I think the quarterback either puts a helmet on or looks at a game console in front of him, and then he learns to read the possible defenses. Is this something that's emerging in the league? What do you guys know about it?
I can't say specifically about what LSU did with Daniels because I really don't know the details of that. But I do know that over the last couple of years, there are some virtual realities. There are the thing that a lot of gamers have with the goggle glasses that they put on.
Yeah, the VR glasses.
Yep. I mean, you're a young guy. You know about this junk. Come on, talk to the man about this.
I mean, I also don't know exactly what you're referring to, but yes, as you mentioned, with technology now, they do have VR headsets that quarterbacks can put on, and it basically looks like they are out on the field, and that is how coaching staffs, collegiate programs can sort of train quarterbacks while the team is not actually out there practicing, especially during the offseason. It gives them a chance to sort of, in a way, implement the offense in the quarterback's mind while looking at actual opposing defenses, but without the whole entire team actually being there.
Yes,
this is a thing that is being used probably at schools all around the country, especially with the bigger programs. In terms of the other tests that you mentioned, the Wonderlic, the SD
ST2, I believe is what he said.
Look, there are a lot of different tests both on the field and off the field that NFL teams, talent evaluators will give to prospects in the pre-draft process. Different teams carry varying weight with these different tests. Some teams might care a lot more about how a quarterback prospect does on the Wonderlic test and maybe slightly less in some other department. Maybe it's the actual game tape or his athletic testing, and other teams are going to think the opposite. So as we saw last year, their report came out that C.J. Stroud failed whatever cognitive test it was, and then went on and had probably the best rookie quarterback season we've ever seen.
One of them.
It looks like, the franchise quarterback for the Houston Texans. So, when you look at the results of these varying tests and stuff, just take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. I'm not saying that they're not important at all. Otherwise, teams wouldn't put players through them. But at the end of the day, the results of those tests, they don't mean everything.
From what I heard is that Stroud did not do well on the Wonderlic, but really scored tremendously high on the S2 test. Listen, guys, I want to ask you one other question, if I may, and it has to do with the new rules for kickoff. Do you see that creating an opportunity for punters to get involved because of pooch kicking and placement of the ball that the normal kickoff guy wouldn't be able to do? Do you see changes like that occurring?
I don't think any of the special teams coordinators truly have a good feel for this yet. because once a rule is proposed on paper, they all will tell you. I mean, I remember last year when we were talking about some of these things, and they implemented the whole thing with the touchbacks, and they changed that and the fair catch and everything. Everybody was like, "Oh, we're going to have to see how this plays out." And I think that's the same answer that everybody's going to give you now. If we would have Brian Daboll in here right now, the head coach of the team, he would probably tell you, "I don't know how this is going to play out." We think the one thing we can tell you about this new kickoff rule, we think, is that running backs will be better utilized as the return guys as opposed to DBs or wide receivers. That's what we think. That's only a guess. I haven't heard anybody else from special teams experience address anything else that they think may work better. When I do, I'll be glad to pass that along. I don't want to speculate myself, because if coaches aren't going to do it, I'm certainly not going to do it.
Yeah, I will say, just to sort of answer the specific question about punters versus kickers, with the new kickoff rule, the ball basically has to land between the goal line and the 20-yard line. Obviously, that's a pretty big part of the field, 20% of the field, but still, it's obviously less of an area than previously where you could kick the ball out of the end zone if you wanted. I feel like most teams around the league, or at least this past season, it's their kickers that have been doing the kickoffs most of the time. I think there might be a handful of teams out there that have a punter as the one doing the kickoff, and most of the time I feel like those guys just try to boot the ball out of the end zone, so there's no kickoff return whatsoever. If I had to just totally guess, again, this is not based on anything I've heard or anything, but if I had to guess, I would think that teams would rather have their kickers, who are, at least with the ball on the ground, probably able to aim the ball a little bit better than their punters, just because it's a totally different kicking motion. I would think that these new rules would lead to kickers handling most of the kickoffs for that reason.
Thank you, Mike.
All right,
Take care.
thank you.
The tricky part here is that the new kickoff rule has a bunch of subdivisions to it.
Yep.
There are a bunch of them. Now, I will tell you right now, I do not know. It's one of the things we do on this program. We tell you when we do not know. We don't try to smoke you like a lot of other people will. I'm telling you right now, I don't know if you're allowed to have your punter do a kickoff with these new rules.
It's true.
You may not be allowed to do it. For example, right, after a safety, you have the opportunity. You can either use your kickoff kicker or you can use your punter and do a free kick. Mm-hmm. You have the opportunity to do that after a safety. I'm not sure if there's anything in the new rules, and you've got the thing with the billion amendments, okay? I'm not sure if you're allowed to use your punter as a kicker in the new kickoff rules. You may have to use your regular kicker. The ball may have to be on the ground. Have you seen anything that indicates that? I know, again, there's a billion different amendments here.
Too much to read.
It will take an hour
now.
and a half to go through it.
I don't see anything about it having to be your kicker in here. That I don't see. That, again, doesn't necessarily mean that's the case, though. And, I know they changed, the rules with the onside kick part, where you can't do the surprise onside kick.
Look at it this way. If someone's going to test that rule, it'll be Coach Fossil down in Dallas.
That's probably
because he is the ultimate special teams coach these days.
Yeah.
He would be the one to try to push the button there and see if they could get away with something like that.
Yep.
201-939-4513. We'll go to Leroy on line 3. You're next on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Hello.
Hello, how you guys doing?
We're well. How are you?
Very great. Listen, I need to start this off by saying I'm a long-time Giant fan. I was around before we even moved over the water, man, before we came to Jersey.
There you go.
And back in the day, I could remember the Giants would always bring in guys, ex-players around the team. You could remember the commissioner. I can't remember who it was then. It could have been Roselle. I'm not sure. But he got involved with the Giants hiring the coach, and that's why we got the GM.
Well, he was involved in the George Young hiring, the GM. That is correct. Pete Rozelle. Yes, sir.
And then George Young went on, and he brought in Ray Perkins. And then Ray started this off, and then that's when the Giants became competitive. They started getting better.
Yeah.
And that's when they started. And then Ray left to go to Alabama, and then all of a sudden we got this guy nobody knew, Parcells. Nobody knew who he was.
Well, he was promoted from the defensive staff. It wasn't like he was a nobody, but the fans may not have known him.
I'm not saying, but most people didn't know him, not to be head coach, you know. And then Parcells came in the first year. He won, 4 or 5 games?
3-12-1. I lived it. Trust me. It was tough.
And then Parcells said after that first year, he said, "Hey, I'm going to do it my way."
Yes, sir.
And that's when Parcells became Parcells.
Yes, sir.
Now, George Young eventually left, and then we ended up with Ernie, right? Ernie. Yeah, and then Ernie, he's the one who was responsible for bringing in Eli and all the guys, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Now, Ernie
I think Ernie's retired now and George has passed. So if you want to bring one of those guys back, that's not going to work.
No.
And besides, I think Joe Shane is pretty much entrenched right now. So I'm not sure where you're going with this.
Yeah, well, I know. I'm going to take you there. Now, we ended up with, after Ernie, then we ended up with Jerry Reese.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Jerry Reese put the team together. And he started getting the right pieces. And if you remember, he brought in Plexico. He needed a receiver. So then we went on. We won a Super Bowl.
Actually, Ernie was the one who brought in Plexico Burress.
Oh, Ernie. Okay, all right. I might be wrong.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Now after that, I think Jerry was responsible for bringing in Sean Harrell, playing to play center, and McKenzie, right tackle.
No, that was Ernie also.
Jerry
that was Ernie?
restarted in 2007 as GM.
Yeah, see, the Giants gave Ernie Accorsi a championship ring for the 2007 season because he brought in most of those guys prior.
Oh, okay.
And they felt as though he had such a hand in building that championship team. He was on the trips, and he got a ring.
All right. Now, all of this is bringing me to Joe Shane, man. You know, because
I'm glad we finally got there.
Yeah, okay. Because I was a big fan of Joe Shane until this off season, man. You know, I felt like he lost me. After the way he handled the free agent signings this year. I'm saying, you know, I'm over the Saquon Barkley deal, but here's the thing. You know, if you looked at it, when Dallas got rid of Ezekiel Elliott, they had Tony Pollard on the staff ready to go. You see what I'm saying? I mean, we got rid of Saquon, but now we don't have anyone. They brought in...
No. They're going to go running back by committee. It's a different philosophy. Yeah. That's all. And Singletary is certainly proven. The guy's been with 5 different playoff teams in 5 seasons.
And you brought up Tony Pollard in Dallas. He's been in the league 5 seasons. In this last year, where he was the full-time starter, it was his worst efficiency season of his career.
I'm with you, man. I know it didn't work out, but they did the right thing. But I'm not sure if Shane's doing the right thing, because I'm saying right now he did get rid of, and then he didn't sign him, and then he did the same thing with McKinney, and we don't have anyone to replace him.
Whoa, wait. First of all,
where am I wrong at?
But both McKinney and Barkley got way out of bounds contracts. They were outlier deals that the Giants were not going to afford and would have been wrong to get into a bidding war for those deals. And so what have they done? They're going to go running back by committee. Singletary has proven to be a durable guy who can lead that pack. And they know that they've got, at the very least, Jason Pinnock, who can play safety with Dane Belton.
Okay.
And there's still the draft where they could add another safety to the mix.
And Mills, by the way, was just picked up as a veteran free agent to kind of help supplement the depth chart. I don't see where he's left the cupboard bare here.
And look, when you were heading into the offseason, I think every person that follows the Giants at all could say that the biggest weakness was the offensive line. So Joe Shane went out and put the most resources towards fixing the offensive line. You can't go and sign, the 5 offensive linemen that the Giants did sign, including 2 to some reported pretty big numbers. You can't do that and then also pay a running back top money and pay a safety top money. There's the salary cap where you have to allocate a certain amount of money towards certain positions.
Leroy, here's the beauty about what you're talking about, and I'm going to let you finish. Here's the beauty of it. You go back to the old Yankee Stadium days. You know what that means? You're back to the pre-salary cap free agent days like I am. And I love those days, okay?
Me too.
I don't like today's rules either, but these are the rules, and you have to play by these rules. Back in the day, you didn't have to worry about salary caps and free agency stuff. Okay? And then you wouldn't have guys running away for an opportunity to break the bank. You didn't have that.
I got you.
All right. There we are.
All right. That's why I was hoping you would be on today, Paul, when I called, because I know you were a long-time fan as well.
I totally understand where you're coming from.
Okay, one more thing I wanted to say. And then they go out and he signed this guy Burns, man, for all this.
Well, he was traded for Burns, and then they had to give him an extension. But yes, go ahead.
But what I didn't like is that they signed him and traded him however they got him. They gave up a second-round draft pick in that deal. And I'm saying we need players. And and the money that you gave this guy, what is he making? $190 million or something?
The reported numbers less than that, but the reported numbers do have him among the higher paid players at his position.
Yeah, and now here we are. We only got like $7 million now. Is the latest report I've heard now, man, as far as money to spend on free agency.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Now it's like he came in, and I felt like his job was to get the cap in order, which we felt like he did, and then he just turned that around and put us back in the hole again.
No.
He didn't put us in a hole.
He didn't?
Leroy, the cap is actually in pretty good shape right now because they've reduced the amount of holes on the team significantly, and it took money to do that. So now, he spent on some things that, when you go to the supermarket, right, you need to go get some food, right? So you go buy the pasta, you buy the bread, you buy the sauce, you buy the oil, you buy the cheese. Well, now you don't have enough money left in your pocket for anything else, but you already got most of your meal. You're just missing a salad. It's okay.
And also, just in terms of the contract, how it sits in the salary cap, the reported numbers for his deal from a lot of the beat reporters had this a couple weeks ago is Burns' salary each year throughout the whole contract is pretty much the same. It's not going to be rising like you see some deals that are backloaded where the last 2 years the guy's making almost double as what he's making in the year one of the deal. Burns' money each year from the reported numbers, again, we don't know, not confirmed, but the reported numbers stays the same. So 2 years from now, when the salary cap is risen by another who knows how many million, 30, 40, $50 million, Burns is still going to be making the same as what he made this season. That's going to be very useful next year, 2 off seasons from now, when Joe Shane's trying to work around the salary cap.
Leroy, his percentage of the cap is going to go down, is what Matt's trying to say. Here's what I will say to you before we let you go. I'm going to let you go in a minute, but here's what I will say.
All right.
Burns was given a contract that is commensurate with a Pro Bowl player. He's had 1 double-digit sack year and 2 Pro Bowl seasons in his first 4 years in the league. But that's the key. The Giants think he's an ascending player, and the best is yet to come. They think he's going to be a habitual double-digit sack guy during the length of his contract here. They are paying him a little bit more for projection than production. I agree with that.
Okay.
But they think the best is yet to come from him. And if he does do that, you're going to be very happy with that deal. Trust me.
Oh, I hope so, man. Now,
all right. Be good. Leroy, we got to run.
One more thing I wanted to say. Now, that was on Shane's part. Now, on Dave, what disappointed me was that we had 2 late-round rookies last year in Jordan Rowley and Hawkins. And in my opinion, they were 2 of your better players in the preseason. Once the season starts, you don't see these guys. And I'm saying Hawkins started.
Preseason. Leroy, you know better. You've been watching the game a long time. Preseason. All that does is give you a flavor of what the guy might bring as you begin to mature him into your system. You couldn't expect them to become full-time guys right away.
Hey, but I mean, but how do you?
Hawkins also started week 1 and played over 60% of the snaps in the first 3 weeks of the season. So it's not like he didn't get a chance.
And he proved he was raw and he was green, and then they pulled him back.
Yeah,
that's okay.
I get it, man. You know?
All right, Leroy. Look, call us again, okay? I appreciate the question, and we're just trying to do our best to put it into proper perspective for you. But thank you so much for calling. 201-939-4513 is our phone number. Jot it down. Big Blue Kickoff Live is live every weekday from 12:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And as always, it's presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. And you can catch us on the archive at giants.com/podcasts and all of your favorite podcast platforms everywhere. For Matt Sytek, I'm Paul Dottino. We'll see you next time.